Since everyone's in. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Stank. I'm director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies here. We're delighted to welcome you to talk about this new book by Glenn Williamson, Building a Glass House in Russia Inside Out, which is a great title. Mr. Williamson, I guess you started learning Russian when you were in high school, right, at Exeter, and
yes.
at Georgetown, and in Leningrad, where I assume you did a program. He has his MBA from the University of Chicago and was very active, I guess, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall in real estate in the new emerging markets in Eastern Europe and in Russia itself. He's teaching real estate at Georgetown University itself, and he is going to talk today about his book, his experiences in Russia. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, and I have to start by giving a shout out to some other colleagues at Georgetown, the Georgetown Book Lab. Carol Sargent, who is the director of the Office of Publishing here at the university. Actually, I've been some of my colleagues from these book labs. It's a very useful group to pull people together working on a book, who talk to each other. And in fact, the name of my book, Inside Out, came out of one of these sessions, which is, well, he left already. But Bill McDonald said, I originally called the book Glass House. He said, you ought to call it Inside Out, because what we did in the book is we took, it's actually a space like this. It's an older building, it's a historic building, but we took what was the courtyard of a historic building and turned it into the center, the granite-covered and glass-covered atrium of the building. So that's where the title of the book comes from. My parents are here today, and I appreciate that. They're actually quite familiar with Georgetown. I went to school here, as Professor Stan was mentioning. So did my sister, and I was actually born here. I was born at the hospital campus, not in the hospital right over there, as was my younger boy. So, no. I wasn't. I was sort of reborn, I guess. But anyway, I'm happy to be launching my book here. I'm happy to see some of my students here from the program, and when I was, what's interesting too about, I'm going to talk about the Ukraine a little bit because, one, it's in the news, but two, it's sort of relevant to my experience here at Georgetown. When I was a student here in the 80s, some of the students studying Russian with me were Ukrainian Americans, a guy named Boris, a girl named Kathy. And they used to talk about how they didn't just study Russian, but they were involved in all these Ukrainian activities, Ukrainian scouts. They would study Ukrainian culture. And I remember at the time, smarmy college kids, said, why are you doing all that? And they go, well, because, someday there'll be an independent Ukraine. And this is in 1983, and we're thinking, okay, so we'll be polite, and say, yeah, that's okay, that's great. But, wow, come on, independent Ukraine, it doesn't make any sense. Well, 30 years on, Boris Daskew, who was one of my colleagues here at the school, he was running the office of Baker and McKenzie in Kiev. He was the partner there. He was in the independent Ukraine. And Kathy actually started calling herself Katarzyna because she got very involved in Ukraine. In fact, her husband, Viktor Yushchenko, was the president of the during the Orange Revolution. So you start these things at a school, and you wonder where they're going to go, and the world changes in the meantime. So it's kind of interesting to see what happens so many years on. The book, I got involved in Russian because of government. I wanted to join the State Department and go into the Foreign Service. But I passed the written test. You can't really not pass the written test if you go to school here. You shouldn't be an investigator or something. But the oral test I didn't pass. Twice I failed. And so I thought, okay, so I'll do something else. I went out to Chicago. I got involved in real estate development. And the good news about real estate is that you can work on projects, and everyone's job is difficult. But at the end of the day in real estate, you have something you can touch. You're in a building like this. It's something really satisfying. That's the good news. The bad news is that the real estate markets go up and down. So right around the mid-90s in Chicago, the real estate market was down. And that's when I remembered that I could speak Russian. And right at that time, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and there were all these opportunities opening up in Eastern Europe. So I was trying to get a job with a downtown Chicago developer at a time when they weren't building anything downtown in Chicago. And I did, in fact, get a job with a downtown Chicago developer, a company called Golub. But that's because they had a project in St. Petersburg. And they needed somebody who could speak Russian, who could go over there. There's no way I could have gone there and done the work that I did if I couldn't speak Russian, because there's so much that goes on that if you don't have the language with you, you just can't even keep track of it. So part of the reason I wrote the book was I wanted to talk about the lessons that I had learned from being over there, and I wanted to share that. I'm now teaching a class. I see some of my students here. They've heard some of these stories before. I like telling stories, and so I wrote them all down and put them together in a book. I think that books can be quite useful for students. And in fact, when one of my Polish colleagues went to Russia, he was working for a company called AIG Lincoln. They started developing in Moscow. I gave him 2 books that would try and give him a sense of what was going on in Russia. One was called The Oligarchs. It's a book by David Hoffman about what's going on in Russia now, or maybe just a few years ago now. And the other book was a book by Richard Pipes called Russia Under the Old Regime, which is a brilliant book. It's about Russia the same way like de Tocqueville's book is about America. Even though it's describing the 18th century, that book perfectly described the people that I worked with in my office, the way that they deal with each other. It's interesting. So, in that general tradition or ambition, but well, I can write something, something that I experienced. Maybe people can find it useful going forward. So what did I find out? What is the context of being in Russia? Well, yes, they drink a lot. We did drink a lot during the day, but and they do it during work. I mean, it's hard because you're during the day working, and they say, well, you want to, we don't understand this loan agreement, have a drink, and you have to drink something, eat something with it, so have a chocolate, have some cognac and chocolate. And I'm going, but I got to get on the phone in 4 hours when they wake up in Chicago and talk to them about this loan agreement, and this is not helping. But they don't drink and drive. It's against the law, and people just don't do it. It's different. And it's funny, we were talking about doctors a second ago. Doctors in Russia make house calls. They come to your house, and they come in the middle of the night. When it's a shock. In America, we've just come up with the idea that we could have an office open after 5 o'clock when we call it an urgent care center. We need a name for it, a place where you go after work when the kid is sick. Kid is always sick after work. So there, the doctor comes to your house, and when you say to them, wow, that's great, house calls, they look at you and say, why would you bring a sick baby out into the cold? And you're thinking, I don't know, I don't really have an answer for that. But it's just, something that's different, that strikes you about the place that's really not expected. Similarly, when my wife was there with our baby son, she'd go into a store, not too much bigger than this, sort of, a little convenience store, and the woman who owns the store would say, why don't you give me the baby? Because you can't possibly shop and carry the baby at the same time. And it would never have occurred to the person making that offer that it would be unusual for someone to hand over their baby in a store where you didn't know the person. Because it wouldn't occur to that person that why would you hurt a baby? How could you, take a baby or something like that? And picture that here in our country. I don't know a single person who would walk into a store and say, here, take my baby, and then I'll be busy in the back picking out other things. So the country hits you in funny ways, that things that are going on that you don't quite understand. We did a lot of different things. We met some great people. We went through and we built this building in the middle of the, we started it before the Russian financial crisis. We went into the Russian financial crisis. We actually lost half of our tenants. They all went bankrupt, all the retailers. But then, because it's Russia, somehow 9 weeks after we had lost all of our retail tenants, we were able to not only settle up with those people, but we released the space and we opened a brand new department store in time for the Christmas selling season. So there's a saying about Russia that nothing and everything is possible. Ничего и всё возможно. And I think that's really true. It strikes you, you know, it takes 6 months to open a bank account in Russia. There's all kinds of ridiculous paperwork, but they can annex the Crimea in about 2 weeks. So, so, you know, when you want the system to work, it can work. When you don't want it to work, it can take a while. So, I want to read a section from the book, a story that about trying to, you know, everyone talks about getting permits, which is not so easy in any country, but you have all of these things that you think are done and they become undone. So this is a story about that. We're in the middle of building this building, and we have a problem. We have to go and see the Russian authorities about the boiler in our building, which we're in big trouble over. So 50 years of Nodor Teknadzor, the banner is proudly proclaimed. I could almost hear the people singing their eternal praise. Russians love anniversaries. 5, 10, 15, especially 50 is a big deal. I had seen the banners and read them as I tried to read all the various slogans left over from the communist times, as well as the announcements of coming events. One juxtaposition was classic. Da здравствует советский коммунизм. Now greet Soviet communism on one building, while the matching sign on the adjacent building said, if you smell gas, call 311. Kleptov and I were both still a little hungover as we walked down the sidewalk. The weekend before, Kleptov's son had married his American fiancée. They had held a nice reception at a restaurant on Krasotsky Prospect, of course. The evening had gone on merrily and ended with 2 vivid images. One was of Kleptov lying on his back and held in the air on a makeshift scaffolding created by the straining arms of several of his friends, so he could sign his initials in the ceiling, one of these ceilings, with a cigarette lighter. This was clearly a local tradition at the restaurant. He was just adding his initials to the others that were already there. The other image kept bothering me in the back of my mind. One of my staff had walked out of the reception with a bottle of vodka for the road. It's not a good sign, I thought, when you leave a Russian wedding needing another drink. Kleptov and I were on our way up the stairs to another dingy government office. We were responding to an official letter we had just received informing us that basically we were in big trouble. Your boiler was imported without the proper authorization, the official informed us. You do not have a design for the boiler, and your boiler has not been properly tested. It cannot be installed until it has been properly tested and designed. Still, that's it. These conversations always scrambled my brain because I would translate the words literally as they were spoken, and then they never made any sense. To me, a design is only needed for something you haven't built yet. But this was not only built, it had already been installed in the 4th floor of our 5-story building, under the 5th floor and the roof. Why do we need a design for something that's already built? Because you don't have one. Why can't we show you the plans that the Finns used when they actually built it? Because you need a Russian design. We'll translate it. It's not the same. Here we go. A Russian design needs to be done by a Russian designer. Okay, I thought. Which Russian designers are available for this task? Well, as a matter of fact, we have an affiliated private design firm that works with our public office and can complete the task. Who runs this firm? Me. I couldn't even laugh. We were behind schedule and we're pushing the Turks to catch up. The Turkish contractor was building our building. Without an approved boiler, we couldn't do lots of things, like heat the building. This meant that not only could we not open for business, we'd have to keep using portable heaters inside so we wouldn't ruin the furnaces on the plaster and the drywall. Summer ends quickly in St. Petersburg, and we needed heat. So you're telling me, if I hired your private firm, you could get me the approved design I need. I can't guarantee it. Why not? I can complete the design, but then it needs to be formally approved. By you. Yes. As a child, I had seen a skit once on the Carol Burnett Show, in which a tourist tries to appeal his speeding ticket in a small southern town, where the cop, the judge, and the mayor are all the same person. But in the skit, those three people work in unison. This schizophrenic official was trying to maintain the independence of each role. What if we don't redesign, or design по-русски, the boiler that's already built? Then you have to have it tested, but you can't test it in my city. It's not safe. And once a boiler blew up and killed people, I have responsibility for the safety of the citizens of St. Petersburg, and I won't allow you to do this. How noble and inspiring this conversation was becoming. The boiler is built into the 4th floor of our 5-floor building. How can we test it outside of St. Petersburg? Well, you could cut a hole in the roof and get a helicopter and carry it to Finland, test it, and bring it back. He said this with authority and seemed convinced of its logic. Maybe it could work, Kleptov suggested. Oh my God, not now, I thought. This was worse than a bad TV comedy, and I knew Kleptov was already focusing on the deals he could make with the helicopter company. Absolutely insane. We cannot cut a hole in our roof, I said, and we cannot decide this question today. Решить вопрос. Мы не можем. We need to speak with our contractor to see what can be done about the testing and the design. Very well, said the official. I will wait to hear from you. So you get in these kinds of situations which are, you know, nonsensical, and you have to try and figure them out. So the thing that I think it's most useful, people try and do due diligence. Now, when we did this building, we were actually the first project to get international financing. It was first project-based financing. So not just so the operation of the building, everything, the due diligence that the lenders would have to do was significant. But you have to think about the kind of due diligence that's going to be the most sensible. And people are always treating something from their own background and not so much from what it is that they're looking at. So, for example, the lawyers come over and they say, well, we want to make sure that the wording of your documents is all proper in English, even though the people who signed them are Russian. So the lenders are saying, the small store owner who you basically evicted from your building in order to build a building and gave a small share in the property, they've promised that they have no more claims on your building. But I've talked about it with my boss back in Washington, and if they could say that they not only promise, but that they undertake that they have no more rights, that'd be a much stronger document. And I remember saying, undertake? It's like, these people don't speak English. I go, what do you, he goes, we just want them to put the same agreement together, only we'll put that one word in it, and then it'll clear my boss up here, and we can move this along. And so you think, all right, they're a little bit focused on something that makes no sense, because the person, what I'm thinking is, I got to go find this person, tell them that I have a new agreement for them to sign. They're not going to get anything more for it, but it's the same as the other one, except it's got one more word in it. And of course, the person you would talk to isn't going to trust you, and they're not going to go along with that. So it's more useful, rather than the documents, it's more useful to listen to the words, and again, back to the Russian, to try and understand what it is you're hearing and what it is it's really telling you. So not just the translated speeches. When you give a translated speech, it's very formal and polite. It's the side remarks you make to your friends or in the room that really tell you what's going on. So, for example, we were at a meeting one time, we were trying to decide whether we could go with a certain contractor, and the partner used a certain word to describe them, which is not polite. And I thought, all right, he's not going to go with this deal because he used this word, and that's really not a good word. Another time, there's a word called kormit, which means feed, but it doesn't mean feed like provide food. It means feed like throw food on the ground for the pigs to eat. And I thought, oh, this is great. These are military people. Somebody has come to me with an opportunity for veterans to get jobs. He's a military guy. They're military veterans. This could work. He says, it's not my job to feed those people. And I realized, okay, Russia, it's not it's a land of groups. There are circles of people, and that circle, these are Navy people. So he wasn't about to feed the Army people. It was a different thing. But it's the word. It's not just that he said what he said. It's the kind of word that he used. Russian is a very funny language because it's quite precise. And it's an interesting place because the language is so precise. But the world it describes is so chaotic. It's crazy. It's not like German, where the German world is ordered and the language is ordered. It's a very precise language to describe a kind of a crazy place. They have those wonderful sayings that everyone loves. You know, trust and verify is something every American knows. I see my colleague Eric here went to University of Chicago with me. We all went to University of Chicago to learn that there's no free lunch. Although in Russian they say that бесплатный сыр только в мышеловке, which means that the free cheese is only in the mousetrap. So I mean, it's the same, you know, and you start thinking, wow, it's the same. We really are the same. And then you stumble into situations where you realize that we're not the same at all. The deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, who was a partner of ours on the deal, was actually assassinated during our project. Nothing to do with our project, it had to do with Moscow privatizations, but he was killed. And so in asking our Russian partners, like, will they catch the person who did this? Will there be a trial? What will happen? And the answer was, from people that are our close partners, people we trust, they said, you know, the time isn't right to solve these things. And it was that was the moment for me in Russia for all those years. That was the moment when I realized there's just a huge difference here, because I mean, people get killed in the United States, right? People get assassinated, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, all those people. But when they get killed, we try and catch the people, we put them on trial, we can discuss later whether there was a big conspiracy or something behind. But just to say from the get-go, you know, the time's not right, it's just different. You know, it's something different. So the trick, you know, people see things the way they would see it themselves, and not the way necessarily you would see it. So I was laughing because I was telling Professor Stent this morning that yesterday's newspaper there was an article about the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. When they accused him, they said there are Russian agents in the Ukraine. He said the Americans are taking their own habits and applying them to us. And it made me smile because my boss in Chicago, when I was working in Russia, sometimes people would come to me with certain accusations or problems, and I didn't understand at all what they were getting at. And he said, no. He goes, you're getting too involved. He goes, what I learned with these guys a long time ago is whatever they accuse you of, he goes, you know they're already doing it. And I was thinking, I go, and it's funny because that's, you know, Lavrov's comment the same way about who has foreign people working in the Ukraine. So, so how do you work with people like this? How do you build a partnership? And I think the answer is, and you know, what we were able to do is, it's not about pushing back and forth and everybody gets half of something. It's about trying to figure out what is it that you really care about, which I may or may not care at all about. What is it that you really care about, and what do I care about, and how do we find a way that we each get what we want, which is not half a loaf for all of us. It's more like something matters to you and I get something else. So I want to read another passage. We were in the middle of a lot of arguments. We'd always have big arguments. They'd end with a big party when we worked them out. But this, the argument here was about the difference between legal bills. We wanted to close our loan. We needed to do a lot of due diligence to make our lenders happy. Russians were getting really fed up with all the money we were spending. And we were getting a little bit perplexed by the way they wanted to spend the money. So the legal bills were becoming less funny over time. The due diligence was endless, and the sense of actual loan agreements was far away. The Russian partners began to lose patience with ever more documents, and right up to the closing they would shout and say, no more. We're not translating or signing anything more. So I made bets I knew I would lose, telling them each time that I'd buy a bottle of whiskey if there were any more documents, but this document, I just needed him to review and sign this one so we could sign it and send it back. The documents were things like share pledges, security documents, other pledges and requirements that made no sense to the Russian partners, like earthquake insurance. We don't have earthquakes in this geological zone, the Russian engineers told me as if I were a student. We need the insurance because the consultant from XPOC, which is the American lender, is based in San Francisco, and he won't approve the loan without this kind of insurance. My Russian colleague paused for a minute. Okay, we get it. You have a share of the insurance bill. That's fine. You don't ask for much. No, I do not have a slice of the insurance commission, I tried to explain. I actually hated the insurance discussion because calling San Francisco from St. Petersburg meant I was literally lying on the floor of my apartment because I was so tired, calling at about 10 p.m. our time, which was when the office in San Francisco opened. But the months were passing and the loan was still not in hand. Some delays seemed ludicrous to the Russian partners. We won't receive the draft this week, I told them, because it snowed in Washington, D.C. last week, and our federal government is closed. The look on Mirsky's face was priceless. This is a superpower? What is the real reason? Why won't you tell us? Meanwhile, the estimates of the construction costs were increasing and the legal bills kept mounting, and the partners had other ideas on how to spend the budget. The atrium itself is not grand enough in the current design, Mirsky said. He's the chairman of the company. At one board meeting, we need something more fitting. The Russian architect Soska came back several weeks later with elegant designs for inlaid granite patterns and a central fountain in the middle of the space. We don't have any money for a fountain, we complained. And besides, the liability insurance for slips and falls would need to be $1 million. We're a U.S. developer, we have a U.S. lender. $1 million? They asked. There are things about your country we cannot understand at all. If a worker dies here, the family will get approximately $5,000, and that will be enough if the person is dead. $1 million for slipping and falling? That's how our country works. These laws do not beautify your country, Mirsky said slowly and deliberately, shaking his head. One board meeting was nearly a disaster. As a type of value engineering, the U.S. team suggested that the budget was tightening, so what we could do is take a new approach to the atrium design. Let's put in ceramic tiles, we suggested, on a temporary basis until the building is fully leased. Then we can replace the ceramic tiles with granite later when we have more money. To a man, the Russian partners went crazy and started talking wildly to one another. Mirsky waved his hands and shook his head no. There are temporary buildings still in use here that were built in 1945, he said. The room fell silent. Ничего так постоянно, как временно. He concluded, nothing is more permanent than temporary. The meeting adjourned without a solution. Mirsky was upset when he left, muttering to his colleague on his way out the door, I will not lose my face in this city. So we began to plan for the next board meeting. I met privately with all the partners and eventually reported back to Walton the Russian partners weren't kidding about the fountain or the legal bills. We won't pay them, the Russian partners said. The hell with the lawyers. But those are our lenders' legal bills, I said. If we don't pay them, the lender's just going to look at us. I said, they're not going to close the loan. We'll never get the loans anyway. And no, we don't want to bet you another bottle of whiskey. We appreciate what you're doing, but the answer is no. So I called my Walton team in Chicago and then met with Richard Sloan and told him my best idea on how to handle the next meeting. First, they're going to talk about the fountain, I said, and how necessary it is for the beauty and pride of the building. When they bring this up, please tell them it's a good idea. Then they will mention the legal bills, and they will tell Walton we did not do a good job as the developer managing the lawyers. They will express shock at the size of the bills and the need to quickly close the loan. We will apologize and say we'll monitor the lawyers more closely, and then they will approve the legal bills, and we'll be done with it. Okay, Richard said, but let's see the design of the fountain. I think it might be better if... No, I said, Richard, please play your position on the field. We don't have an opinion on the color or the shape of the fountain. It's their thing. Besides, it's going to cost us about 50 grand. Let's just let them have it. They'll pay our $300,000 legal bills, please. The point is that it really is true. We did that, I guess. We had a mini version of that. We had more legal bills. So they wanted to put some fish in the atrium. So it's like, all right, same, we've done the skit before. So give them the fish, we'll get the 20 grand of extra legal bills, that we'll get it done. And it's all moved on. I think the trick, though, which is really true anyway, and I've had those meetings in Chicago as well. They're a little bit more, they're less complicated. But it's not any different than any normal board vote. You go around, you pick up the votes from each of the people, you find out what they care about, you think about how to make it work, and then you let it play out. But you have to be willing to kind of go along or not be, first of all, not be willing to see things the way that they might see them. So how do Russians deal with all this stuff? All the laws they have, all the additive laws. There's a great, first of all, there's a saying that they use, which is actually Italian. They don't take the laws all that seriously. First of all, they have so many that they can't keep track of them, which is in a way why you could see them getting so upset about their new law on homosexuality and that issue. It's like, well, they have so many laws, one more law isn't going to matter so much to them. So the Russian phrase is, or the Italian phrase, actually, for my friends, anything, for my enemies, the law. It's different. Law is not a system of order, that rules that we follow. Law is like a stick that I can hit somebody with if I'm in charge, or if I'm not, that I have to watch out for. It's just a different idea. The other way they dealt with these things is they would go to the banya, the sauna that they have. They would escape to their weekend cottages. Russian dachas are kind of famous. We had very close friends when we were in Russia. We would go to their dacha. And I tell you that is my favorite memory of being in Russia by far. We would go to this little log cabin that they had in the middle of the woods out near Finland. And the ground floor was the banya, it's this sauna. And it's freezing cold outside. It's about 20 degrees. And so you come out of the banya, you have no clothes on whatsoever. It's about 20 degrees outside. And the funny thing is, as long as you're wearing flip-flops on the bottom of your feet, you're actually not cold. I don't know why this works, but it's true. The cold doesn't conduct. And it's one of those sort of local tricks, but it's like, okay, if you have the flip-flops on, these are like beach flip-flops. So you go, pick up the bucket, which has a weight on the handle. So you have to throw the bucket down the well to break the ice which is formed on the bottom of the water. Pull the water up, and you dump the water over your head while you're standing there. Now, in that moment, all those lawyers and all the lenders and all the permits and every other thing that's on your mind is gone. I mean, it is really something that you just goes, and then it's a cycle. You go take a drink, you go back in, you come back out. And, for me, that was a super escape. I was talking to one of the, Georgetown has a program with this Ranepa school in Moscow. We had some visiting students here just a few weeks ago, and I was talking to one of them. They use those banyas more like we use a golf course. It's like they settle business there, and in a way, it's for them, it's a kind of interesting thing because you're sitting, you have no clothes on. It's not like there's a whole lot of posturing you can do about anything. It's like everybody knows exactly who they are, and they have these sort of clubs where he says they get together and they meet at 11 o'clock, and they settle all these issues that they have to work out. So it's quite a place. So I think finally I'll just end and give people some time for questions. You think about going to a place like that and being immersed in the culture. You're never, I think the image that I have is not really exactly immersed in the culture, because no matter what you do, you're still an American somewhere else. So it's more like you're kind of a bridge. And so you're a little bit closer to their side, you can see it more clearly than somebody who's further away. At the same time, you've moved that much further from where you were in your own country, your own side of things, so you can look back and see your own country, not quite as they see it, but you're a little bit further away from it. You can see it in little distance. The book is not about, thank goodness the Americans came and fixed Russia. It's just not like that. It's not true, and it's not the way that story went. But it's it's a book about Americans and Brits and Russians and Turks and Finns and one Indian guy who were all part of this group that made this whole project work. We had to negotiate. My job there eventually was to sort of be in the middle and try and make some of the stuff that the American side did, the Russians didn't understand at all, a little bit more understandable to them, and vice versa. And to negotiate with our own government. We had, U.S. government was not only our lender, they were also our tenant. The consulate was in our building for part of it. And so it was interesting to see, having spent so much time on getting these documents and everything together, and to say, oh, we're going to work in a world of these documents. When the crisis came in '98, all the tenants wanted to renegotiate their rent. They all wanted to pay less because the market had come down. So I had this very interesting conversation with the consulate officer, because when you sign a U.S. government lease, there's a catch-all clause. It's not even a force majeure clause, which would have some event or something that you could respond to. It's an overall clause. It says no matter what, at any time, we can cancel this lease if we feel like it. So when we first got that, we said, well, maybe we could edit it a little bit, because that's kind of broad. And they said, no, it's not up for discussion, and that's just the way it is. And they said, look, we would never, ever use that for a commercial advantage. We would, that's not what it's there for. It's to protect the government. So when the crisis came, and I met with this guy, I said, you guys promised us, you said you would never ever use this for a commercial reason, and now there's a crisis, you're first in line. Like, hey, we're going to pay less rent. Why? Well, because we can just cancel. And I was like, all right. So I go, well, what's up with that? How are we going to pay our lender, the U.S. government, if our tenant, the U.S. government, doesn't want to pay us their full rent? Don't you see the connection between this? And he goes, look, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I go, all right, fine, live with this. So I thought, how are we going to manage it? I go, well, it's just a question of time. So the longer we stall on this, then they'll pay the higher rent till we make a decision to lower their rent. So I said, well, okay, I accept, but we'll have to have a board decision on this, and the board isn't meeting this month because of whatever reason, and so we'll have to wait, and next month somebody got sick, their ankle was hurt, that couldn't be. So finally, a couple months later, he comes back to me and he says, you're not just stalling, are you? Because the longer you stall, the more that we have to pay in rent. So I looked at him, I looked him straight in the face, and I said, I would never, ever do that. so you have to learn to, to work these things. I think, I think, and I tell that story to again say it's a kind of a two-sided thing. So now I'm teaching international real estate. I would encourage students, some of them, to go out and try these things. Just like Boris and Katarzyna sitting there, you don't know how the world's going to change when you leave Georgetown. It's an opportunity while you're here to really build some skills and to really, take them out into part of the world to try and make a difference. And it doesn't matter that, you might fail or that you might get a few strikes against you. I have some of my baseball colleagues in the room who also are coaching with me. And I have to say that what I like about baseball is that whole idea of you're going to get a couple strikes against you, but you got to swing. And I was telling my kids just the other night, look, nobody's watching that third strike come in. Swing. It's okay to swing. I think about my own life. Like I said, I failed that foreign service exam twice. But I still went to Russia, still built a building, and I spent 10 years overseas. So, things work out a different way than you might have expected, but they have a way of working out. So I'm gonna end there and just give people an opportunity to ask questions, and I'm happy to talk about Russia or real estate or whatever's on your mind.
Thank you very much. I have one short question and a somewhat longer one.
Okay.
When you were working in St. Petersburg in the 1990s, did you ever meet the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg responsible for foreign economic contacts, one Vladimir Putin? Did you ever have dealings with him?
I am told by one of my colleagues that he signed the papers that transferred the property to our firm. I'm not sure if that's storytelling or not, because I came in 1995. They had signed the papers in 1994 when he was in the administration. But yeah, he was part of that whole group. In fact, Manevich, that whole St. Petersburg group were in the administration. We were there.
And then the longer question. So, what are the 4 or 5 pieces of advice you give an American wanting to go and invest in Russia, do business in Russia? What are the 4 or 5 things they need to know?
Well, there's an article that's coming out today in Insider magazine, which is for corporate real estate people, and so they asked me that same question.
Okay.
So it's a little bit on my mind. The first one is to speak Russian. When you're doing real estate development, there's always a lot going on, but there's a kind of pattern to it. You understand, the architect should be fighting with the contractor. That's normal. So when you go to a place where the architect's not fighting with the contractor, or there's other things going on in the room, you're realizing it's different, and you have to sort through what's a risk and what's normal or what's none of your business. And I think that if you can speak the language even a little bit, if I couldn't have heard all those remarks that were made on the side, I mean, when the one partner walked out of the room and he said, "I won't lose my face in this city," what stuck in my mind is that he didn't say anything about money. That whole argument was about image of the building. It wasn't about money. So I thought, all right, so that's what matters. So I think the language is important. I think it's important to also know, to kind of keep your eyes on the prize, and that means not sharing your valuable opinion about things that don't concern you. If there's a lot of stuff going on. Some of it doesn't concern you. And if it's not going to impact your project, then just let it go. People don't welcome your opinion on everything, and it's also just not useful. And finally, I would say, that there is something to be said for understanding the group mentality in Russia. We think of it as, the Americans and the Russians. And I think Americans, we have groups in America, sure, there's cliques, but it's a much more open society where people can move between groups and you can hire individuals. I'm not sure that's true in Russia. Russia's a kind of place where, in my experience, there's groups of people who know and trust each other and act a certain way, and they don't necessarily mix with other groups, even in their own country, that are not their people. And so, in our case, we hired our partner who built the Red October submarines. They had a lot of people in their group. One of the reasons they got involved in real estate is they wanted to find jobs for people in a defense industry that was kind of going down, and the person who ran that is a kind of a padrone, is really the most accurate translation of who he was. Kind of his charge of his group of people. So all the guards were Navy officers, and all the people who worked in the building were in his group. That meant that they knew and trusted each other. You have to trust your partner, because obviously that's a solid thing. But I think that there's no way that we could have built that kind of a team ourselves by just hiring individual people and saying, now work together. That's just not how that country seems to work.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
They don't have, we did not. And in Poland there were groups, but those groups are more, they're much more cynical situation. There was a group in Poland that called itself the Society for the Prevention of Pollution or something, and basically they just told the developer of a large shopping mall that they needed $15 million, otherwise they were going to file all kinds of protests. So I think that those kinds of, America has a nonprofit sector. It has very active government, private, and nonprofit. I worked in nonprofit development groups in Chicago that built things and that were involved in a lot of projects. There's no equivalent to that in Russia. And in fact, the biggest, the government sees those kinds of groups as a threat. they see them as a threat. They don't encourage them, and they're really there are what there are is it's a when I went to St. Petersburg after having worked in Chicago. So Chicago is it's run by the mayor, the dailies or somebody, the machine, it runs. And so there are people, there are different groups, but there's one person who's in charge of it. In St. Petersburg, struck me that it's a feudal system, but there's no king. There's no one person in charge. So for example, Coca-Cola wanted to build a new plant, and the governor, the mayor, was there, and he says, we're doing this, and so great, we're shaking hands and all. And then after the meeting is over, the fire commissioner comes up and says, there's a problem, and what's that? Well, it's such a new building, you need your own fire station. And so I'm thinking, this is nuts. You wouldn't have freelancing by the department heads in Chicago. If the mayor said it's a great idea, they'd all be saying, yes, it is a great idea. They wouldn't be saying, I have my own opinion. So that kind of a system, I think in Russia, I think Moscow was more centralized, but in St. Petersburg when I was there, you have this endless group of people that come see you, but they're not community groups. They're people who have little power centers. That guy running who was going to give us trouble about the boiler, we couldn't go to the city property committee was our partner, but he didn't work for them. We had to deal with him separately. It wasn't like somebody, you were building a building here, Georgetown's building a building, and Mayor Gray says it's a great idea. You wouldn't expect a visit from someone in the Department of Transportation or whatever telling you that there was a problem. It just wouldn't happen. So it's a question of making, because the word Russian, razbirit, it's like settle up with. You have to go around and make your settling up with all these people. But they're not community groups. It's just a different system. Yeah.
To follow on that question, do you think that the difference between what you experienced in St. Petersburg and what you might have experienced in Moscow, which was a city that was far more under the control of one mayor, kind of reflected the political realities or the strength or weakness of the particular mayors that you were working under in the 1990s?
Moscow was a fiefdom run very strictly by Yuri Lushkov. They always talked about him as a hazayan, boss kind of figure. His wife ran a construction company. She did quite well. I think his salary was quite modest, but things changed when he elevated his comments to federal issues. Things changed drastically. There's a phrase about there's a file on you too, kind of a thing. So I think that they discovered afterwards a number of problems with the construction. I don't know how they settled it, but so I was not involved in that. I was happy, our building was under the radar in a way. It was, but it wasn't. It was a $30 million project, which is a lot when you're 35. But in the scope of if you think about what buildings cost in D.C., it actually wasn't a large building. So I think that the fact that we were in a world without oligarchs, without a lot of people sticking their fingers in it, that made life easier for us. There really were people in that administration who wanted to get things done. And it's interesting, that whole group of people who later went on to become some of the head people in the national government, were all originally from the Sobchak administration. There were some sort of, I don't know if reformer is the right word, but there were a group of people trying to get things done. And so that was very useful. But I think the biggest problem was that this was all new, and so people were kind of stumbling around issues. But we did, we were able to work with the administration. The most challenging thing we had to do with the administration was that it's a mixed-use building. We had a ground floor was all retail, and it wasn't originally that way, but really that was our silliness. We forgot that we were on the main street, and we could have put a door on the main street, and then we would have had access to those customers. We had originally designed an office building with a side entrance, but we found that the market was telling us, we'll pay you a higher rent for the stores, but you have to have an entrance onto Nevsky Prospect. But our building was a building of a national character historically. All these buildings in Petersburg are historic, but it was tricky. So what we did is we worked with our architect, who had been involved in the mayor and all that, with the historic preservation people, to figure out a way to add a whole new entrance to the main street in a historic way, and he did that. He figured out a way to make it look like it belonged there, and that really helped. That made our whole project work. So, you know, we had to go through all those committees. There's enough of them, you know, to get these approvals. But I think, I mean, my experience in life in general is you can get a lot done if people aren't paying attention so much. I mean, it's like sometimes you really can. But yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got that big tenant after you lost half of them in the building? Any lessons to be learned for the collective space that is available in the market area right now?
Opportunity, serendipity, really. Our tenant went bankrupt. The Britansky Dome, it was the British Home Stores, kind of a mid-level department store, and they went bankrupt. It was really a classic thing. They had invested, they got a 1-2 punch. Their market disappeared because they were aiming at this middle class that was emerging, which when the crisis came, the rubles fell by 75%, and that obliterated the purchasing power. And at the same time, this business, which had been, they had some trouble just as a business. They were merchandising, then they were really getting their feet together. They had close out on what they used to have, and they brought in new merchandise. And but their money, they had sold all new the old merchandise. They're getting ready to buy the new stuff, and their money was locked up in rubles in a Russian bank that was going belly up because of the crisis. So basically, that's like a 1-2 punch. They had $1 million in cash that went away, and they lost all their customers. So we had this empty space, which was 10,000 square feet, and it's very visible. It's on the main thing. So one day, these 2 Finnish guys come in, and actually I love Finns. I mean, my experience there has been really helpful with Finnish people. So these 2 Finnish guys come, and they said, "You have a problem, and we have a problem too. We are going to open a brand new store, Stockman department store in Moscow, and we know it's October, that we can't possibly sell all the merchandise, that we cannot stop, because to order merchandise for a department store takes like 9 months, and they get it through customs and all that. So they've got this train in motion that they can't stop, but they know they can't possibly sell all these things in Moscow. So what they said is, what could we do? They said, well, maybe we could spread it around. St. Petersburg is the 2nd largest city. They had other smaller stores in St. Petersburg, but not department stores. So they said, you have a problem too. He said, we should talk, because you have a big empty store, we have all this merchandise, so if you can get it ready for us in 9 weeks, then we can do something. So what the lesson to me about all that was that everyone had negotiated these agreements and all of that. But at the end of the day, we didn't use the agreements at all. We just sat down. I mean, it was a difficult situation. We'd actually seized all the merchandise of the people who were there before, because they said, well, we're bankrupt and we'll be leaving. And we said, you guys owe us some money. And they go, yeah. And I said, well, you have all this merchandise here, so maybe we should just keep that. And they're like, by what right? And I go, well, the lease does say that anything left in the space after you've canceled is ours. So you've canceled, and it's still here. I don't care if it was 10 minutes ago. That's what it says. So that was a little bit hard, but we worked out, we put the agreements aside, and we basically just sat down like normal people in a very difficult situation. We had to get all those issues settled because the new people can't come in, and then we had to get all their bureaucratic stuff settled up. The funny thing was, so we did. 9 weeks later, we opened a brand new department store. We actually had to use some of the same fixtures that the other guys belonged to them, but I didn't want to mention that because that would put me at a real disadvantage, that we needed to use their stuff. But we did. We worked it all out. And the funny thing was, is we've moved now from, when we started this building, we were using fax machines to send documents, so that puts it in perspective. And then it's become much more high tech. The hardest thing to do in that time period was actually the internet connections, the IT. when you buy something in a store, it registers, it tells the warehouse there's one less shirt, and it tells the accounting department that you've got revenue instead of expenses. It's got to all be connected. So the Finnish guy comes to me and he says, he said he went into their IT department because everything else was going to happen, and their IT guys back in Helsinki, this is the land of Nokia and all that, they said, no, it's not enough time. There's no way, 9 weeks, we can't do this. So Finnish people are kind of a little quiet and laconic. And the guy tells me, he goes, I went into their room and he goes, you people, he said, nobody knows what you do in here. He goes, IT stuff. He goes, even the Russians are on time. So he said, you are not going to screw this up. We have to open, because you can't sell Christmas merchandise on, after Christmas. So, so we did, actually. It was a very, we put aside all the nonsense. We focused on what we were doing, and we opened the store, and then we got to fly home and be home for Christmas. So yeah.
Glenn and I have been involved in the same book groups and conferences about publications. And I have a comment and a question. I envy your ability because we've talked about this. I've been 30 years in business with Russian artists, and I do not speak Russian, and I've always been at the mercy of translating. And often when the translator is more on the business side of the artist, it gets very difficult. So I think what you said was, I had to decide what I could do for them and what I wanted to do for them and stick to that. That was very important in the business. But Glenn, why didn't the picture of your building appear on the cover? We made the choice to put some that. We talked about that.
It's a funny situation. So I said I wanted a cover that said Russia. That cover says Russia from a distance. Okay, it is, well, the book, when I wrote the book, I thought I want to tell a story that is true and that is useful. So I'm going to change the names of everybody in it, so it's not an issue about I didn't do that or that makes me look good or bad or anything like that. And so I changed the name of the street and everything. And I thought I have some pictures of parts of the building on the inside, but I didn't put the picture of the building on the outside. If you want to investigate the building in today's time, it would take about 3 minutes to Google and find what all these things really look like. But it is a beautiful building. I mean, they really, what's really cool about the building is that, and this has to do with St. Petersburg too, you're so far north that actually the sun will rise over the river and set over the same river because you're on top of the globe. So it moves around and it sets back in the same place. What that means is that if you're in a place like this, and we have all different colors and different kinds of facades on the inside, it'll hit them and they'll change color during the day as the sun hits it. That's the good time, in June. And it's a little bit dark in December. But it's really a beautiful place. And it really, when you getting back to what I like about real estate, it's like a stage. It's like a big stage. And you, when I was, you work on this for so many years, do all these problems and everything, and then we were in an office that was like right up there, and you could see everything. So you could be on the phone and you'd say, okay, here he's coming. Okay, he's going to meet with him. That makes sense. What's he doing over there? You have this really interesting sense of what goes on. And we had a cafe in the middle that worked out well. So it was nice, yeah.
Why don't you tell us about the award ceremony, all the pomp and ceremony, when it was internationally honored?
We won the Fiapci Prix d'Excellence in, I don't speak French, so I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but in London at the Guildhall, they had the ceremony. And it was terrific because if you've ever seen a Bugs Bunny cartoon where they have the jousting, the people have these long, torns, then they have the big banners that hang from it, and they da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And every time somebody got something, they would say, okay, the next award for Best Office Building in 2000, the Nevsky, atrium, they would put the horns up, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and people are wearing these medieval outfits. So it was really terrific. And it was an interesting thing. What they said is one of the reasons we're giving you this award is that somehow you're able to reconcile all these different things. Between it's a modern building. It's a Class A building. It had all kinds of things in it that were not common at that time, It was also a historic monument. It was redone as a historic thing, and it really was an international partnership. So we really had something in it for everyone. But like I said, I think the main thing was people kept their eyes on the prize. So they wanted to make it work, and that's why it worked.
That's great. Well, I have certainly been in that building many times, and I'm going to be back in St. Petersburg next month. So
good.
next time I go into the university atrium, it will mean much more to me having read this book. Thank you very much.
All right.
This was
Thank you.
a very interesting story.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And for those of you
Thank
who
you.
would like to buy the book, it's out there at the back on the table.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.